you have to learn thinkers, you have to code thinkers, that's the only way to score in the subject. That's absolutely not true. My journey started in October 2023 to attempt 2024 pre and mains. That meant I had very limited time to prepare for anything, including my GS. Optional is like your girlfriend. If you keep her happy, your UPSC will be happy. I actually enrolled in Nishat Sir's crash course and I preferred to make digital notes for optional. I think that was one of the best advices that I got. And there were times in my corporate job that I used to feel, why am I not getting, like, why is the client not listening to me and listening to my associate, who is a male but younger. So there were instances that I used to feel that, okay, maybe patriarchy does exist. When I read the syllabus for paper 2, I was like, this is just so relatable. Just the fact that, talking about family, patriarchy, religion, I just felt that maybe there is another way of looking at the world which I've not thought of.
It is a competitive examination. Write what is relevant and write precisely.
Yeah.
Don't just flood your answer with paragraph thinking that the humanity subject is equal to writing in a paragraph. ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता. It's a myth. क्या उठाते हो आप टॉपर कॉपी से, क्या चीज को ध्यान रखते हो? और वो रियलाइज आपने बोला, मुझे अब जाके रियलाइज हुआ जब मैंने एक लड़के की कॉपी देखी, क्या देख के अच्छा लगा? Okay, so guys, very good afternoon to everyone. We have with us today All India rank 44 Mudita Bansal, and before I ask her to introduce about herself and describe her journey, I would like to tell you briefly about her background. I generally call her a Fodu person. Okay, I've been calling her Fodu for the past 5 minutes now, but she has been Fodu since forever. Now that I know her profile, she was actually working with a great global management consultancy firm called as BCG, Boston Consultancy Group. This is something that I wanted to share with those guys who are working with private sector, specifically in consultancy firm, in case they ever aspire to crack UPSC exam. I'm sure her guidance can definitely help you guys out, and her guidance is not just limited to those people but to everyone. And she was working with this company BCG as a strategy consultant, and which means इनका काम बहुत सिंपल भाषा में अगर मैं बोलूँ तो ये था कि गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर या एनजीओज या प्राइवेट कंपनीज को ग्रो करने में और प्रॉब्लम्स को मिटिगेट करने में कुछ एड एंड एडवाइस दे सके. एग्जाम्पल के तौर पे अगर कोई कंपनी है, फोर्ड कंपनी है, उसको ईवी में ट्रांजिशन करना है अगर पेट्रोल से हटकर, तो मुदिता का रोल था कि वो फोर्ड कंपनी को ये समझा सके कि ईवी का मार्केट कितना बढ़ेगा आगे जाके और ट्रांजिशन कैसे करना है और एम्प्लॉयज को ट्रेन कैसे करना है. That means she was a problem solver, and this problem solving technique is now going to help Mudita develop a great policy and implement the same now with the government. Earlier she could develop policy, but now she could implement the same as well, right Mudita? So without any further ado, I would call Mudita on stage and she will describe her journey in few segments. Mudita was a student of our crash course program, sociology crash course program. So Mudita, firstly, many congratulations.
Thank you so much, sir.
Now, students would really want to know briefly about all the segments that you have in your mind that you would like to share with the students, and then we'll describe some. We'll have some question answer session, Q&A session. First segment is this is also one problem that many aspirants are trying to solve. Which option should they take? Okay. How did you solve this problem at your end? And also, if you could briefly talk about your journey, as in why UPSC.
Sure. So hello everyone. Thank you for the kind words. So my journey started in October 2023 to attempt 2024 pre and mains. That meant I had very limited time to prepare for anything, including my GS and optional, because this was the first time I was actually picking up a book as simple as Lakshmikant. And optional, though, bilkul, I had no idea on what to do because I graduated back in 2019 and I've been working, like, while I graduated in economics, I have been working since then. So I had zero, like, memory of whatever I had read in my graduation. So I had to decide a completely new optional. And that's when I started looking at what are the different options, right? After talking to a few seniors, etc., I realized that for me, there were three big options that I could go for. Either I just go for economics because it was my graduation subject. Second was anthropology, or third was sociology. The first thing that I did was I just read the syllabus of all these three subjects. To be honest, I didn't understand like more than 60% of it because I had no idea on what it was written.
Yeah.
But when I looked at anthro, it definitely helped me eliminate anthro because I realized it involves a lot of cramming and learning of words. So I realized that I can't spend my time studying a subject so deep because optional, like there used to be a sir who said that optional is like your girlfriend. If you keep her happy, your UPSC will be happy. So I realized that this is something that I can't get into because just because it's going to be too demanding. Then it was economics or sociology. For while I studied economics and I absolutely love economics as a subject, one thing I realized working while even when I was studying and especially while working for the last few years is economics I used to find highly ideal. Like in an ideal world scenario, this will happen, etc., etc. But being on field, I realized there were so many limitations to everything that I'd studied in economics. And there were times in my corporate job that I used to feel, why am I not getting, like, why is the client not listening to me and listening to my associate who is a male but younger? So there were instances that I used to feel that, okay, maybe patriarchy does exist, even in a high, like fast paced corporate job. And when I looked at sociology, I realized there were certain areas which directly started giving me answers to those questions. It helped me and again, when I like, especially for paper two, when I read the syllabus for paper two, I was like, this is just so relatable because one, I'm a hardcore feminist, so like just the fact that talking about family, patriarchy, religion, like I just felt that maybe there is another way of looking at the world which I've not thought of. Like I know these things exist, but I never really thought of why do they exist or how my economics of an ideal world scenario will actually apply in the real world. So that's why I decided to go to sociology. And second, obviously, it has a limited syllabus. Like, because of my limited time, I also couldn't take up a very vast optional. So those were the two big reasons on why I decided to go with sociology. And to be honest, I think it was the best decision I made because I used to spend at least 5 hours every day doing sociology from October till January. And between my pre and mains, like 6-7 hours doing sociology. And I don't think there was a minute when I decided to, like, I regretted my decision just because I found the subject to be so interesting. So, like, I remember the first time I read about Mead. He's a thinker and he's usually a very underrated thinker. But his concepts of I versus me and the development of self, I realized that it's so basic that and just for like everyone who doesn't understand it, it's a very simple concept that there are two stages of life. One is a play stage, one is a game stage. And you take up the traits of people you're surrounded with, which makes your personality. It's such a basic concept because it's very intuitive. But reading about it made it so real. So I think that those were the big reasons why I took sociology and honestly it changed the perspective I look at a lot of things. So I think that is the reason I took sociology. I think the biggest myth that's associated with sociology, like I just mentioned, is thinkers, to be honest. I think every sociology student that you'll talk to is that you have to learn thinkers, you have to code thinkers. That's the only way to score in the subject. That's absolutely not true. There is a right balance, and obviously, I'll get into the segment of what is that right balance. But please get over that myth. Second is that paper two, while yes, like even I mentioned, it's dynamic, does not mean that PYQs are not important. So the myth that PYQs are only important for paper one and not paper two because you don't know what will come in paper two is not true. So like I always say that PYQs are your best friends. That is what I say even for for GS, and especially for optional. PYQs are your best friends if you know how to use them correctly.
Yes.
The third myth that's associated with sociology is that even in the syllabus, when you're looking at the hotspots, so like for example in paper 2, people just think that okay, Andre Bati or MN Srinivas are the only two gods. It's not true. So the myth that you can, if there's a syllabus and you can just focus on two things and leave out five other things just because you think that's what's going to come, is not true. So please don't try to rationalize a subject which is already rationalized. So when you're doing the hotspot analysis, don't just blindly follow hotspots. Fourth is, and it's not a myth, but just a thing that people say that if when it comes to resource list, to be honest, like I don't think anyone in sociology has been able to crack what is the right resource. The myth usually goes around is Nitin Sangwan is enough. It's not true. Like genuinely, it is not true. But it also does not mean that you do endless resources like IGNOU, like Harlumbus. That's not true. So the fourth myth is around like Nitin Sangwan is enough is not true. And also IGNOU is not enough. So like fourth list is like around the resource list. I think these are the four biggest myths that are, and sorry, there's one more, which is when it just comes to presentation in an optional paper. Like there's a myth that because it's an optional paper, so you need to like long essays, which was applicable, I agree, till 2020, 21. Paper has changed. And if you don't change, your marks will not reflect it. So just the fact that, but it also does not mean that it's a GS paper. So I'll also get into how like you can solve for it. But the fact that it's an essay paper is no longer relevant. Like, don't keep writing essays. So the myths that essay format works, and I've heard that a lot, to be honest, is not true. So I think these were the 5 biggest myths that I had to overcome. So please add if you have heard anything else from students.
Yeah. तो कहने का मतलब है you don't have to flood your answer with thinkers or paragraphs. दोनों point बड़े important है, first और fifth. It is a competitive examination. Write what is relevant and write precisely.
Yeah.
Don't just flood your answer with paragraph thinking that the humanity subject is equal to writing in a paragraph. ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता. It's a myth. Second point that she raised is PYQs are your best friends. Extremely important point. Extremely. More than syllabus, I would say.
Yeah,
Okay.
true.
Like people would say, syllabus याद होना चाहिए. ये मुझे नहीं पता होगा.
It does help.
It does help. But PYQs अगर याद नहीं है ना, तो syllabus भी याद किया हुआ फायदा नहीं है. So PYQ याद रहना चाहिए. PYQ याद करने से भी syllabus याद हो जाता है. So that way you can go reverse. Hotspots, इसको आप थोड़ा elaborate करो, क्या कह रहे थे आप?
Hotspots मतलब like when actually 2 and 3 are connected. So when you look at PYQ, so people often have these myths that, you know, if you just learn chapter 4 of Sangwan, which is your thinkers chapter, most of your, like 50% of sociology is covered. That is true because it's disproportionate for your foundation, but that is not your syllabus. आपको याद रखना पड़ेगा कि 4th chapter is only going to cover like 30% of your questions, and there'll be 70%. So don't just keep reading 4th chapter over and over again.
Okay, very nice, very nice. So basically she's saying that in paper 1 we know 4th chapter is very important because it is theoretical. And then 5th chapter is equally important again because it is equally theoretical and lengthy, and most of the times we see 4th and 5th, the weightage of these two units somehow outweigh the weightage of other units. But then the problem is, just because we think that 4th and 5th are very important, we tend to ignore other units, and we start believing that we can utilize the 4th and 5th chapter in other chapters as well. So that would be wrong approach. So 4th and 5th are definitely hot, but rest are not cold. All are equally hot.
Because it's a competitive exam after all.
Yes, definitely. And 4th resource list?
Not only Nitin Sangwan.
Okay. Not only Nitin Sangwan. Okay.
Like, there's like, when I started talking to my seniors, they just mentioned that do Nitin Sangwan and sleepy videos on YouTube, and that should be more than enough to cover. I genuinely think that if you do that, you'll not be able to cross only to like 230.
In fact, you made a very interesting point. Last in the past 3-4 years, I've seen there is this figure called as 220.
Okay.
Okay, it's not a random figure. It's based on
Statistics.
statistics. Okay, I have seen many students hovering around 220 marks. Okay,
Exactly.
and not just for 1 or 2 years, but 3-4 years as well. They're not able to figure out what is wrong with their approach. And 220 to 225, this is the range. And most of them, when we interacted with them, found out most of them were following Sangwan and the other class. Okay. Now, see, there's nothing wrong with these two, but you can't underestimate what we call as the demand of the question, thinking that you have this keyword in this question, now start dropping whatever you read from these sources. No. Examiner is specifically looking for the answer, not notes. Okay. And what happens is you tend to blindly follow these and you tend to reproduce the same without bothering about whether you met the demand or not. And after coming out of the center, I've seen, being an aspirant myself, I have seen that many students just discuss how many thinkers did you write in this question, whether did you write this thinker or not. So this becomes a discourse that needs to definitely change. So yes, definitely it is a myth. So these are the 5 myths, and I would not want to add any other thing because these are definitely those myths which are very much part of aspirants' life who have taken sociology. So yeah, now the second segment, if we switch to the second one, it is about what problems you personally felt. Like you said, you said these are not sufficient. Now here comes, how did you experience these are not sufficient? What made you feel so? And what are the other problems that you experienced? Yeah.
So maybe I'll start with the not sufficient point, which is my fourth point.
Yeah.
So I don't have a sociology background. So I didn't understand anything. Like the first time I read Karl Marx or Weber, like just from a book, I couldn't understand it completely. That's when I went to the sleepy videos and then read Nitin Sangwan. So it definitely gave me a very strong foundation. Like I was now able to understand what was written in the book just because I had a base. But for the first 4 months, I actually didn't look at PYQs because the only benefit you'll derive out of PYQs is when you actually know content at least like in a 30-40% way, right? I was reading about, so I think I read Sangwan twice and I made my notes out of it. After that, I don't think I've touched the book again. But that was basically my understanding of sociology. Then after my pre, I picked up my PYQs for the first time just to see that based on my understanding, how much am I able to answer? And that time I realized that while I understand the concept, I can't write it. Just because it's like sir mentioned, don't write your notes, write your answer. I think that is what I heard hundreds of times in like the classes. But that was actually true because now I just knew my notes, but I didn't know how to write. So that's when I started feeling that, okay, one, this was not enough. So, and I'm not great at writing long things. I'm a very 1, 2, 3, 4 person. So like bullet points, short, etc. So creating that bend of mind where I know that this is not my GS paper, but an optional paper, which has changed format. That is a skill that you have to develop, which I had started developing after my pre. So I had 2 months to learn the skill and master the skill. So I think that was the second biggest problem that I faced. Third is just choosing the test series. Like, and I remember spending like 5-6 days doing my entire market research to see which are the test series which are going to be the most representative of my real exam. Um, and like that was, I think, the biggest third problem that I do face. Other than that, I don't think there were like any challenges. But yeah.
So let us write those 3 problems that you faced. Okay. So these are 5 myths, whatever it is. Okay. And then we'll talk about those 3 problems that you mentioned. 3 problems
One was answer writing, like how to write
One was that content
was insufficient.
insufficient. Like you just mentioned, that when you relied on that book, Nitin Sangwan, you felt after going through PYQ that you would not be able to complete 3 pages.
At least in like paper 2. Maybe for paper, not for paper 1,
for
but at
paper-
least for paper 2.
At least for paper 2. Okay. So that means you did not start feeling that, okay, I will complete even for paper 2 by writing critique लिख के भी तो complete हो
I
जाता है.
agree. Yeah.
And
yeah.
वही भी एक issue है.
Actually, that was a myth. The
वो
critique
myth
part
है ना,
also.
उसको भी
Yeah.
हम add कर सकते
I think you should add it. That you need to like 4 critiques or something.
हैं.
That
Writing
seems
3, 4 or 5 critiques.
Yeah, I agree. That was a big myth.
It's actually big myth. Okay, and we'll discuss later on why it is. Anyway, content she found was insufficient, especially for paper 2 in the book. The second issue that she
Was the format of writing. So basically, answer writing practice.
And she clearly told us that she had only 2 months in her hand after prelims, and before that she had not practiced answer writing. So within those 2-3 months, she had to develop the skill of writing and then to implement the same in the span of 2-3 months. That means if you have never practiced answer writing before prelims, no need to worry. Yeah. Considering that we have live example of a person who developed that skill, implemented the skill, and then got the result as well in the period time span of between pre and mains as well. And third problem that she
was tests. Which are the right tests?
Which is the right test series?
Yeah.
Okay, and what do you mean by right? Okay, all those. So these are the problems that she faced. Okay, so now if you could explain very briefly on each of these points, how did you cover up the content for those parts which you felt were insufficiently covered in the book or the sources that you refer? Second, what was the final format that you implemented? Point or paragraph or a mix? And third, how did you decide what is right? What is the parameter?
Sure. So for the content being insufficient, I think I followed a dual approach. One is I actually enrolled in Nishat Sir's crash course because that was the only thing that was matching my timelines, to be honest. Jahan pe sir used to take classes every day on the specific hotspot topics. So I had already made my notes from Sangwan and I preferred to make digital notes for optional. I think that was one of the best advices that I got from my seniors, that at least for optional make digital notes, because you want to add to content. In GS, I never give this recommendation. I always say limit content. In optional, I always say add the right content just so that your answers are enriched. तो उसके लिए, because I had my digital notes from Sangwan, I used Sir's classes to keep adding any point that I didn't already have in my notes. So that was the first thing that I did. And the second thing I did, because Sir also does not cover every topic, he also focuses on hotspots. So I used to do a Google search of the topic and write UPSC. One of the amazing things about internet is there's so much material online. Like there are certain teachers who are amazing and have actually uploaded like proper 3 or 4 page answers. I used to just read that answer and see if there's any good point, and I would just add that. And third is I started creating my own content in terms of when I used to write, and actually maybe I'll cover it in my second point as well, is when I used to write, I always kept getting the feedback that you're writing generic answer or it feels like a GS answer. And I felt that it's because I have not internalized my content. So I created a dictionary of sociology words. This is something that I do.
Your own dictionary?
My own dictionary. So basically, if I have to say poor or rich, I would say upper class or middle class. Mm-hmm. So or for example, if I have to say, like I have to talk about urban-rural divide, I would, instead of saying divide, I would use the word stratification. Okay. So I started creating my sociology dictionary, which when I started reading over and over again, I realized that the content that I had interlinkages. So it added to my content, because then I could use what I did in, let's say, chapter 3 in a chapter 7 answer. And that made my answer more sociological. So I think that instead of thinkers, I started focusing on vocabulary of sociology. Second was the format of writing. What I ended up, and I tested in a lot of test series, was I ended up with a mix of a paragraph, essay, and a pointer format. But there's a caveat. One thing that I actually didn't hear from test series invigilators is in GS, there's often like an introduction, then you put a box, you like for the heading, you do 1, 2, 3, 4. You put another box, you do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have a conclusion. Sociology doesn't work that way. It's an academic subject. It's not a technical, it's not a GS paper. So the answer still has to be free flowing. While it has moved from an essay to a pointer format, it is these are still PhDs and academic professors who are reading it. So they don't want to like read 5 or 6 word sentences like we do in GS, but proper statements. So the format that I settled for is, and maybe I'll just write it down, is if let's say this is my answer like booklet.
You can use the next slide as well. Let me switch to the next slide.
So the first thing that I would always do is for every topic in my syllabus, I would have an intro ready. That I see mostly works. Paper 1 is very easy. Paper 2 also it's decently easy, which will be a very sociological, a thinker-based introduction. Here I would go against Sir, but it used to be a sociological or thinker-based thing. For example, if there's a question on family, I would actually start with a thinker, say that in his or her book has defined family as this. This made my intro much more sociological and much more academic, because then the person felt that okay, she's not just read her GS and writing the paper, but she actually knows content.
Right.
The second thing that I would do is similar to GS, there are always sub-segments in your question. I would identify those sub-segments, but instead of writing in a box and a heading format, I would write a proper line. For example, if I have to say that, okay, what are the components of family? Or like, what are the different types of families? Instead of saying that types of families in a box, I would say, there are new types of families emerging. I'll not put a box, but I will like write, I'll start from here if my intro starts here, and then make this statement.
Okay.
Just so that it seems like a distinct heading, but it's also free flowing. Then I would do my 1, 2, 3. And these 1, 2, 3 will be proper sentences again. So, for example, if I'm talking about a sandwich family, I would write that 1 is a sandwich family. But I wouldn't do my GS thing like this. I will not that. I will write my sandwich family is a new concept. It's a proper statement with adverbs, with adjectives, with fillers, because it's a free flowing answer.
Right.
Then if let's say there's another segment, then I would again do the same thing, and then I would do 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's very clear segments, but it's still a very holistic answer. On critique, let's say there's a thinker question, I would always add critique, but that critique will be like, I would just write critique, do a chota sa circle, 1 and 2, not more than 2. Please don't write more than 2 critiques in a 10 marker and more than 3 critiques in a 20 marker. Like, they are asking about the contributions of the person, not the criticism of that person. And then, which I think might have worked differently, is when I was doing a conclusion, instead of just writing and hence this, I would try to bring back what my question was and put a forward looking or a real life application to it. For example, if I'm talking about, there's a social media movement question, right? So I would end it with, and either I would use a real life example, for example, the Pahalgaon movement, or I would use a contemporary thinker or another thinker that I know of to relate, just so that again my conclusion looks much more sociological, or the person at least knows that I've internalized the concept. So I would say that, and the Pahalgaon concept shows that there is a sense of nation and community. For example, that way.
Very nice.
Or, for example, there is another thinker called Baudrillard. who talks about hyperreality.
Yeah.
So I would then give a concept like something like that, or like a structuration theory, if whatever I feel is relevant. So I had these new age or contemporary thinkers, a list of 4 or 5, not more than that, that I would just try to put in every alternative answer if it was relevant.
Right.
So this way my answer was very holistic.
Yeah.
It starts with static, it addresses my answer, and it's slightly more forward looking.
Right.
So this was the format that I ended up with.
Now, very interesting point. She is saying that don't unnecessarily write multiple critique. Don't even think about writing multiple critique, because anyway they are not going to take more than um, maybe 1/3 of your page, that to the last
Even
one,
less than
even less
that.
than even less than that, right? So please avoid writing multiple critique, because that shows that you're running out of content to address the demand. Please let us ensure that examiner does not feel that. Okay. Secondly, coming to the body part, she is saying that she used a mix of para and point format both. But in most of the cases, I think you may have used, in most, if I were to say most, maybe point format. Okay.
Points, but basically instead of writing it in an essay format, I would split those lines, slightly shorten them, and put it in a pointer format.
Okay.
So like I think 90% of my answers was pointed,
Okay.
except let's say like a very religion answer,
Analytical, maybe.
or a very, very theoretical thinker answer is when I would write an essay.
Okay.
And that too in a 10 marker, not
Fine.
20.
And when you would write these points, you clearly said, when you are writing points, you are not in a hurry or a haste to just drop those points that you had. You were really into writing the complete sentence with adverb, adjective, everything, etc. That means full-fledged sentence
Agree.
is presented to the examiner, not just drops. Okay. Uh, and this is very important point, because most of the times we end up writing, we end up dropping notes. I mean, the micro notes that we have for our own quick revision, we drop the same thing as a diagram बना के गोल गोल. वो नहीं करना चाहिए. Full sentence basically she is saying, points में. अच्छा, while writing these full sentences, as you said, sandwich family or some other forms of family, were you bothered enough about dropping name of thinker against sandwich family and Ding family, or were you just writing sandwich family, Ding family, and what was your approach?
So I think it varied question to question. For example, a sandwich family itself is a very sociological concept,
Yeah.
right? Or a Ding family is itself a sociological concept. You actually don't need a thinker there,
Right.
because it shows that you know sociology. But let's say you're talking about patriarchy, right? Where we know a lot of thinkers, I would not firstly never start with a thinker. Like if you have to write a thinker, let's say this is my point in the bracket, I would just write the name of the thinker as like an XX. So it's basically 2 additional words. And and it shows that okay, I know a thinker. Usme bhi I try to limit the number of thinkers. For example, in a 10 marker, I would try to not drop more than like 3 or 4 thinkers. That was like my upper limit. Like don't write unnecessarily if you definitely know of a very good thinker. For example, whenever I used to talk about intersectionality, I would always write Kimberly Crenshaw because she's a very important thinker. Or for example, Ashish Bose, right? So some good thinkers drop, but don't over-index on it.
Yeah, very nice point. Okay. So I guess guys, you got the basic idea as to how to go about answer writing. The first thing that she mentioned was introduction. Now, in most of our classes, our idea was that if you're not able to think of any good introduction, just drop the definition of the given concept that is there in the demand of the question, be it family, be it religion, whatever it is. So I would say, in case you're not able to think, then simply drop or start with the definition. However, she is saying that she would go with proper flow, starting with the name of the thinker, the book that he or she has written, and then uh, going with the demand that this particular thinker in his book defined this thing like this. And in case if she remembered the year of the book,
no, I never went into that level of detailing. I don't think it's even needed. And even the books that you're remembering, just remember it for the most famous thinkers. For example, for Durkheim, his book is on religion. So it's, I think, called Elementary Principles, Elementary Forms of Religion.
Yeah.
These are simple names. You know for a fact that it's a high probability topic. Spend extra like a couple of hours to remember it. It's not that difficult. Or for example, when we say Karl Marx Manifesto, right? So these are some basic books, at least, and try to do it only for the 5 or the 6 big thinkers that we have, but just try to remember their books.
And those 4-5 thinkers in paper too, maybe.
Exactly, like for MNS, for Ghurye, for Andriyapati, like I definitely used to try and remember the name of their books.
बेसिकली वो ये कह रही हैं कि आप जो थिंकर्स हमारे सिलेबस में हैं उनकी जो इम्पोर्टेंट बुक्स हैं, सिलेबस में तो क्योंकि ज़्यादा थिंकर नहीं दे रखे, पेपर 1 में 6 ही हैं, पेपर 2 में 4 दे रखे हैं एक्सप्लिसिटली, तो 5 में भी, तो आप इनके ना जो सेट ऑफ इम्पोर्टेंट बुक्स हैं उनके नाम आप याद कर सकते हो, और ईयर ज़रूरी नहीं है जैसा ये कह रही है, इन्होंने खुद भी शायद नहीं लिखा है,
कभी भी नहीं लिखा,
उतना स्ट्रेस नहीं करना है बेसिकली ईयर को लेके, अगर आप बुक भी लिख रहे हो वो भी बहुत बड़ी बात होती है। ओके फाइन, सो ये तो रहा आंसर राइटिंग को लेकर पूरा स्ट्रेटेजी इनका, और आई थिंक 20 मार्कर में भी आपने कुछ ऐसा ही फॉर्मेट रखा होगा।
हाँ, 20 marker, I usually there is like a third element to the question. One thing that I tried to add in a 20 marker was actually a diagram. Like, I know it sounds very GS, but there are certain diagrams which the thinkers have given.
Okay.
Always try to do that. For example, the CW Mills Power Elite. It's a very basic concept.
Very nice.
I would just draw 3 circles. I would do this, tuck, tuck, tuck. And I would say this is my Power Elite.
Very nice.
So it's such a simple thing. It takes up my space. It saves me time. And it just shows that I understand the concept.
Very nice. So diagram is something that you can introduce in your answers, specifically with respect to certain important concepts. पावर एलीट एक कॉन्सेप्ट है गिवन बाय CW मिल्स, जो कि बहुत ही सिंपल भाषा में वो बोलने की कोशिश करते हैं कि अमेरिका को चलाने वाला प्रेसिडेंट नहीं है, सिर्फ एक सेट ऑफ एलीट है, और वो एलीट आते हैं 3 बॉडीज से। एक सबसे बड़ी बॉडी है फेडरल गवर्नमेंट की, दूसरी बॉडी है मिलिट्री की, और तीसरी बॉडी कॉर्पोरेट्स की। इन तीनों बॉडीज के जो हेड्स हैं वो मिलके पावर एलीट बनते हैं, और ये 3 ट्राइंगल वो 3 बॉडीज को रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं, और इन 3 ट्राइंगल का जो सबसे ये पॉइंटेड पार्ट है एज, वो रिप्रेजेंट कर रहा है हेड्स ऑफ दीज बॉडीज को, और इसको सर्कल करके उन्होंने पावर एलीट शो कर दिया। वेरी नाइस रिप्रेजेंटेशन। तो यानी फोर्सफुली कोई डायग्राम नहीं बना रहे हैं, और ऐसा डायग्राम नहीं बना रहे जो समझ ही ना आए एग्जामिनर को, relatable होना चाहिए।
Maybe like 3 or 4 diagrams in your entire paper. It's not a GS paper where I always recommend more diagrams. 3 or 4 maxes. And in like a thinker or like a, जैसे अगर social mobility पे concept है तो upward mobility for Karl Marx, जैसे proletarialization या कुछ इस तरह का concept, where you genuinely think that the thinker might have given that diagram.
Yes, yes. Okay, fine. अच्छा, so let us go to our next segment. How did you overcome these problems that you had? And with regard to answer writing, what were the initial mistakes that you were committing in test 1?
Yeah.
And by the end of test 8, what difference did you see in your approach of answer writing?
I remember my first test, I scored 96 marks. And I was crying that day because 96 is too low. And by the end, I started scoring between 130 to 140.
Very nice.
And there was obviously a very clear trajectory, right? The first test that I wrote was, I think, 1 in a complete essay format. 2, I was writing my notes. Like, whatever I had ratified, I was very, like, after writing that first test, I realized that I understand the concept at a very surface level. I don't understand what is actually needed because I've not internalized the content. So, I used to start revise, because then the answer flows more naturally. So, वो मैंने second किया. Third, again, I would give credit to Nishat Sir for this, to be honest. Sir ki class mein, at least in the crash course, there used to be a segment where he would give us a PYQ and he would put a timer here and you have to write the PYQ. While I was doing all my classes online, on a Zoom or even a recorded, like actually 90% of the times recorded, I would still write that answer and then see what Sir discussed. That was like the third thing that I did. And fourth thing, which I genuinely think helped me a lot, and this can be for any test series that you take, is most of these test series release a topper copy segment for every test. The first test that I wrote, I went to the topper copy segment. I looked at topper 1 and topper 2. Usme bhi, I didn't like topper 1 answers, to be honest. I like topper 2 more. मैंने अपने आंसर देखे, मैंने उसके आंसर्स देखे, and I realized the difference. That is where I started learning from others. This I used to do for GS also. because only when you know for the same question, this is how someone is writing and this is how I've written, you learn. Like, one thing is your answer key, which is fine. You need to do it just so that you have more content. But that you're never going to reproduce. So that can't be the way you analyze your tests or answer writing. So I think that is what made the biggest difference. Just always comparing myself with the people who are better than me.
वेरी नाइस, वेरी नाइस. इसको जरूर लिखेंगे. मोदिता के टेस्ट 1 में
सर इतना बड़ा नहीं लिखना चाहिए.
अरे थोड़ा एक बच्चों को दिलासा मिल
I
जाता है, रिलीफ
agree.
होता है कि चलो
I
ठीक है, हमारे भी अगर 90s में आ रहे हैं तो कोई बात नहीं, हम भी कर सकते हैं स्केल. तो मुदिता का स्कोर जो था टेस्ट 1 में, शी स्कोर्ड 96 इन सोशियोलॉजी, फर्स्ट टेस्ट दैट शी रोट विद अस.
Last
एंड
test was 145.
हाँ, एंड लास्ट टेस्ट वाज 145. ओके, टेस्ट नंबर 8,
Yeah.
145. तो इजिली 50 मार्क्स का जंप यहाँ पे दिख रहा है, which does not necessarily represent the marks that you get there, definitely, but it does represent the difference that you see with change in your approach towards the questions. Okay, and she must have realized what changes she need to inculcate in her approach, as she said, by referring to the best copies that we used to upload. और बेस्ट कॉपीज को जब हम देखते हैं, मुदिता ये भी अच्छा एक क्वेश्चन होएगा वैसे, बेस्ट कॉपीज को आपने देख देख कर प्रोग्रेस करी, प्लस आपने PYQ सेशन वो सब किया जो भी. बेस्ट कॉपीज जब आप देखते हो टॉपर की, या उस टाइम तो जब हमारे साथ आप रहे तो फिर उस टाइम वो टॉपर तो थे नहीं, लेकिन वो टॉपर इस टेस्ट सीरीज में थे, क्या उठाते हो आप टॉपर से, टॉपर कॉपी से क्या चीज को ध्यान रखते हो? और वो रियलाइज आपने बोला मुझे अब जाके रियलाइज हुआ टेस्ट 2 जब मैंने एक लड़के की कॉपी देखी, सेकंड टॉपर की, फर्स्ट वन आई डिड नॉट लाइक, सेकंड वाले की मुझे अच्छी लगी, क्या देख के अच्छा लगा?
So one thing that I used to look for is जैसे ये वाला जो entire concept about thinker book etc. तो मैंने देखा कि अगर if I was the invigilator and this is how I used to look at it. If I was the invigilator and there were 2 copies in front of me, which answer would I score more? Is the lens that I started applying. अगर मेरे पास एक इंट्रोडक्शन है, फैमिली इज डिफाइंड लाइक दिस, और दूसरे में लिखा हुआ है कि मैंने दिस थिंकर डिफाइंस फैमिली एज दिस, even if I don't give that person an extra mark, I would have a positive perception of the person. What is giving me positive perceptions? That was like one. Second is, if I have written, let's say, 4 points, are there additional points or additional dimensions that this topper is talking about? So then I would keep adding it to my framework and inculcating it. Actually, that's one more thing that I started learning between test 1 and test 8 is यहाँ पे my answers used to be very कि हाँ जो इस सबको पता है, generic, थोड़े mechanical, right? Like, and this is like obviously a trajectory, right? Like my first was 96, second went to 106, third went to 108, 10, and उसके बाद increase करना मुश्किल होता जाता है, तो it was 110, 12, 18, and that's how it progressed. बट उसमें मैंने क्या किया, आई स्टार्टेड डेवलपिंग फ्रेमवर्क्स. फॉर एग्जांपल, पेपर 2 में आई रियलाइज दैट वन फ्रेमवर्क वर्क्स वेरी वेल, and this like might be a cheat code, but one framework started working very well, which was I would make my points, जैसे अगर let's say I have to write 10 points in a 20 marker, मैं उसमें अलग अलग डायमेंशंस ऐड करने की कोशिश करती थी. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, माई 1 point will be around gender, second will be around class, third will be around caste, whatever is your syllabus, I would make that 1 point or 1 angle of my answer. Fourth will be migration, fifth will be family, sixth will be religion, because everything impacts everything. So this is the beauty of sociology, to be honest, because everything impacts everything. If it is technology, it will impact my family and it will also impact my gender. तो मैं उस तरह से अपना आंसर होलिस्टिक करने के लिए, और वो टॉपर कॉपी से समझ आता है, वो कहीं और समझ नहीं आएगा, because you will feel the difference when you read those copies.
As long as that is addressing the demand of the question.
Obviously, as long as it is addressing the demand of the question, that obviously was like, actually ये भी बहुत बड़ा difference है between 96 and 145. यहाँ पे I was writing notes, यहाँ पे I was writing things that I didn't even know like directly in my notes, but let's say मैंने कहीं पे भी पढ़ा है. GS1 society मैं जो पढ़ती थी, I used to extensively use it in my GS2, like in my paper 2. या फिर अगर मैंने GS1 में एक्चुअली, एंड ये फंजिबिलिटी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। आपने पेपर 1 में जो पढ़ा है वो पेपर 2 में कोट करो, पेपर 2 में जो पढ़ा है वो पेपर 1 में कोट करो। मैंने ये चीजें बहुत करना स्टार्ट कर दिया था। लाइक आई रिमेम्बर कोटिंग, जब मेरे रिलीजन पे कोई क्वेश्चन आया तो आई रिमेम्बर कोटिंग मेरे पेपर 2 के थिंकर्स इन पेपर 1 बिकॉज इट शोड दैट आई अंडरस्टैंड द सब्जेक्ट।
तो दैट मीन्स यहाँ पे मैं लिख सकता हूँ वेरी स्ट्रॉन्ग presence of mind and demand.
Demand. I think demand, actually, if you address the demand of the question, be it in your optional or your GS, you will score more than others anyway. और उसमें value additions keep incremental, like increase the marks incrementally, but most people miss addressing the demand of the question.
तो सबसे बड़ा जो issue रहता है, what creates the difference between these two extreme ends is that students lack the idea about demand.
Yeah.
That is very important. And then even if they know what is demand, they lack on presentation.
And I think it's mostly because you don't internalize content, revise content, keep revising your content. Those linkages will start happening yourself. Matlab, actually there was, and this is like just an additional point, and if you are, let's say, writing next year ka mains, so one thing that I did 1-2 days, which I think was a game changer in my entire prep, was मैंने एक दिन बैठ के ना एक table बनाया, which was, and this was majorly for paper 2 because I used to really struggle in paper 2, which I think is true for most of the aspirants. I literally wrote all my syllabus. It was a digital sheet. Main syllabus topics on my y-axis. I wrote all my thinkers, whatever thinkers, be it Ghuri, from Ghuri MNS to Ashish Bose to everything on my y-axis. और फिर मैं यहाँ पे couple of words डाल देती थी कि इसने इस टॉपिक पे बोला है। उससे क्या होगा, there are too many chapters in paper 2. There are like 15 plus chapters. आपने यहाँ पे कुछ पढ़ा होता है ना, आप यहाँ तक आते थे भूल जाते हो। यहाँ से मुझे क्लैरिटी आ गया कि हाँ, ये इंसान तो सिर्फ इसके, like when I talked about उत्सव पटनायक for example the first time, she is so commonly quoted. I didn't really understand what she even talks about जब तक मैंने नहीं देखा that okay, she just talks about this, like she just talks about, I think, caste. She just talks about caste, but she's often quoted in caste.
Agrarian economics as well.
Exactly, because I never understood that linkage. तो ये linkages ना, और जब आप ये पढ़ते हो, because your paper 1 को hold is usually stronger as compared to paper 2, those linkages also start making sense with your paper 1 and your paper 2. So that is, I think, what takes you one step ahead of others, because you internalize content.
Yeah, internalize and then you externalize the same via such mind maps.
Exactly.
Okay. So this is like a mind map, और ये तब निकलता है जब आपने चीजों को अपने अंदर समेटा हो अच्छे से,
वरना इससे रिवीजन भी अच्छा हो जाता है। Like it is like a 10-minute thing to literally revise your entire syllabus in one map.
Right, right. Okay. So let us take some questions from the students end. क्या-क्या questions हैं आपके guys? Vivek, ma'am, how to improve mains marks? Can you please elaborate on that in detail? This will be my third attempt. Also, can you tell a plan which you would follow if you had to give 2025 mains? तो बेसिकली विवेक, आपको आपका क्वेरी है मेंस के मार्क्स कैसे इंप्रूव करने हैं. इफ यू कुड शेयर योर प्रीवियस मार्क्स विवेक, that will give us fair idea as to what could be the problem. Before we answer your question, and till then I'll take the next question given by Sameer. Digital notes means typed na?
Actually, can you project?
Yeah, sure. यहाँ पे.
So
guys, let us also go through the digital notes that she has made, just to give a fair idea as to what constitutes the digital notes.
So this is my paper 2 ka notes. So what you will see is, I actually, and I wanted to make sure that my notes are handy enough. So मैं क्या करती थी, I made like a very simple, and you actually don't need the third column as much. If you want, you can add what is the topic, which is basically my syllabus ka every keyword is my topic, so that I know I've covered everything. And then content. And content कैसे होता था कि I think maybe this is not best. So if let's say I show you for this topic, right? Maybe like something that's easier for me to explain. Land reforms is an important topic, to be honest. I have seen every alternative here. There's a question on land reforms. This was literally like my entire note on land reforms. आप इससे ज़्यादा reproduce नहीं कर पाओगे. ये भी थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही है. Like I would say that जो भी मुझे like background ये है etc. effectiveness which is basically जो मुझे दिख रहा था कि हर साल PYQ में ये dimension पूछते हैं. I would add the heading of the dimension and I would say कि हाँ ये thinker है और ये वाला बात किया है उसने. अगर यहाँ पे 10 thinkers हैं, I would honestly retain only 2 to 3. I would write more क्योंकि मैं ऐसे इकट्ठा करती थी इसमें से. But I would just like, for example, land reform, I always remembered I have to talk about PC Joshi because he's a very important thinker. तो फिर मैंने याद कर लिया था कि हाँ मुझे land reform आएगा तो PC Joshi करना है and that's what you see highlighted. Yes. So this is a slightly older version. That's why there's no double highlighting. तो पहले blue was my like first revision highlighting. Then I would do a red highlighting also, which is not there in this one. जहाँ पे अगर मुझे और important highlight करना है तो फिर मैं ताकि जब मैं पिछले दिन revise कर रही हूँ I'm just revising my reds. Okay. तो इस तरह से. So and for example अब उसमें जमींदारी abolition पे या फिर अगर ये पूछते थे कि agrarian social structure is changing, तो then there'll be a topic heading on agriculture changing and then there are few points on it. So इस तरह से the benefit of having digital notes was अगर मुझे कोई dimension add करना होता था in that particular syllabus topic, as in when I was doing PYQs, I could do that easily. If I was reading from Nishat Sir or any other teacher for that matter, I could just quickly add a point or maybe double highlight the point because I felt कि हम लोग ये तो बहुत ही important है. और ये वाला मैंने छोटा सा कॉलम रखा हुआ था for my critique कि ये 3 thinkers मुझे critique में करने हैं. And last तक आते आते वो इतना maybe you will see the red here, right? So this because when you are sitting between your paper 1 and paper 2, there are 3 hours, like 2.5 to 3 hours. A lot of people follow different strategy. मेरे लिए I just can retain much more अगर मैंने freshly read किया हो. मैंने पूरा paper 2 का red read किया था 2 घंटे में बैठ के और मुझे याद रहा तो मैं पेपर में लिख के आ पाई. So this just helps you much more to revise, retain, recall. So this is how I made my digital notes. Like I will also share these notes if people want. They're slightly in the raw format because I told you I was very time crunched. So I was just learning and typing. And ये मैं real time बनाती थी. So I used to. So the first segment, the first draft of this was when I heard Sleepy ka classes is when I made my notes. Then I read Sangwan. I added to the Sleepy notes or removed which I felt was extensive. And then I heard Nishat Sir ka classes and I used to make real time notes. So I kept a double screen with my laptop. मैं इधर नोट या फिर अपने फोन पे चला के वो देखती थी और मैं साथ में टाइप करती रहती थी. तो this is how I would do that. But I think and जैसे जो मैं आपको डिक्शनरी बोल रही थी तो it's very easy to write the word disadvantages or cons. I would always make sure I write dysfunctions because it shows like it brings that motive, right? Right. तो और मेरा ऐसा टॉपिक ऐसे होता था ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन हुआ उसके पॉजिटिव्स उसका डिसफंक्शनल उसका अनइंटेंडेड बिकॉज ये किसी ना किसी साल में पूछा है एंड देन माय टॉपिक खत्म. इसके बियॉन्ड नहीं जाते यूपीएससी. इतना ही करना है. डेफिनेटली. Like people go into a flood of reading. There is a limit to studying. Yeah. This is the limit to studying. Very nice. And with this, I would also like to add one more point here. She may be uploading these notes in the coming times, but please understand you don't need to feel FOMO in case you find or come across a thinker which is not there in your notes. Don't borrow notes from her notes. Borrow the way of making notes from her notes. Okay? कि आपके जो खुद के नोट्स हैं आप उनको भी ऐसा ही कर पाओ बजाय कि आप यहाँ से कुछ उठाओ. Agree. क्योंकि अगेन ये समझ ज्यादा अब मुदिता को ही आएगा. थर्ड पर्सन को नहीं आ सकता जब तक उसको बहुत ग्रेटर डेप्थ ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग ना हो. सो वे ऑफ मेकिंग नोट्स इज मोर इम्पोर्टेंट देन द कंटेंट present in her notes. Yeah. And again, just try to find things that you can use in multiple places. For example, I used to love this entire book, capitalist concept. वो बहुत जगह यूज हो जाता है. एग्रेरियन सोशल स्ट्रक्चर चेंज हो, कैपिटलिज्म चेंज हो, क्लास का कोई कॉन्सेप्ट हो, कास्ट का कोई कॉन्सेप्ट हो, तो ये इस तरह की जो चीजें हैं ना मतलब this is much more extensive. To be honest, I didn't retain all my notes.
Yeah.
पर वो चीजें मैं आइडेंटिफाई करने लगी थी जो मुझे पक्का याद रहेंगी and I can write it in my paper.
ये वाला एरिया हमने लास्ट में किया भी था, अग्रेरियन में बुल्लक एंड ट्रैक्टर.
हाँ, ये आपके के नोट्स हैं ये वाले थे.
लेजेंड्स की जेंटलमैन फार्मर्स. सो ये अग्रेरियन सोशल स्ट्रक्चर एरिया भी काफी इंपॉर्टेंट है, थोड़ा सा इग्नोर्ड भी है, मतलब स्टूडेंट
आई
ज्यादा
एग्री, पर उसमें पक्का क्वेश्चन आता है.
का क्वेश्चन आता है.
इस बार तो उसका सीधा 10 मार्कर आया था आंध्र बित्ते का.
सो ओके गाइस. अच्छा नाउ मुदिता, इफ यू कुड शेयर, क्वेश्चन देख लेता हूँ कहीं आपने क्वेश्चन आया हो स्टूडेंट से. मैम, हाउ वुड यू बैलेंस बिटवीन जीएस एंड ऑप्शनल टाइमलाइन, योर रिवीजन एंड आंसर राइटिंग स्ट्रेटजी फॉर देम? बेसिकली बैलेंस बिटवीन जीएस एंड ऑप्शनल कैसे किया आपने थ्रू आउट योर प्रिपरेशन?
Like I mentioned, your optional is your girlfriend. So जैसे आप अपनी लाइफ में डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेट टाइम अपनी गर्लफ्रेंड्स को देते हो, वैसे ऑप्शनल को भी देना होता है. So if you are reading, if you're studying like let's say 12 hours a day during, especially between pre and mains, I would give 6 hours only to my two optional, and उसमें भी like optional 1 and optional 2 based on the day, and बाकी के 6 hours for all my other GS, which is actually very disproportionate because I'm spending like 6 घंटा on 2 subjects versus 6 घंटा on बाकी 5 other papers. But I would always do that because I always say there are 3 things which are a make or break in UPSC. One is your optional, 2 is your essay, 3rd is your interview. So and because you're just working for main, so like essay is a different game altogether. But optional has a very high return on investment. Like one, just because there's too much repetition. Like if you keep analyzing PYQs, you can almost predict like 60% of the paper. Like paper 2 this time we couldn't. वो काफी ही अलग आ गया था. पर वो, and how I would divide even my optional का 6 hours was actually I used to give much more than 6 hours to be honest to the optional, because मेरे पास 2-2.5 घंटे का तो क्लास होता था और सर लास्ट में आके तो 6 घंटे की क्लासेस लेते हैं. So I used to listen to his classes at 2x just so that I could save more time. I would then revise my content for like 2 hours to 3 hours, and without fail I would spend at least 1 hour answer writing every day. चाहे मेरा टेस्ट है या नहीं है, there have to be at least 5 to 10 questions, at least 5 questions that you're writing every day, because I told you it's a skill. You have to develop the skill of answer writing. And so like if it's 6 hours, so 2 hours to source videos, 3 hours to my revision, and 1 hour to answer writing is how I would typically divide my optional time. And बाकी का जो 6 hours है was my GS time, जिसमें and the GS strategy is very different, so I'll not get into it. But basically like 12 hours इस तरह से, and try to push for more hours between pre and mains. I'm not talking about like before pre or during your overall journey, just because a lot of you will be writing mains very soon. Try to push for even beyond 12 if you can on a few days. Use YPT app, it's extremely helpful. And just try to give it all. Like there's just one thing that I always like, I had it written on my home screen, which is like, if you want to shine like the sun, burn like one. So just keep reminding yourself, and optional is basically the sun that you actually have to burn the most for, because it will give you a much higher return as compared to something like a GS1 or a GS3.
Right. So that means even if you invest 6 to 8 hours, especially in these times between pre and mains on optionals, that is going to give you a return worth more than what you would have invested in GS. So that way definitely yield ज़्यादा है उसका optional का, for many reasons. And but ये भी बात सच है कि I guess मुदिता है ना कि कोई भी इंसान regularly पूरे साल 10 घंटे 8 घंटे नहीं पढ़ सकता. कुछ टाइम पीरियड ऐसे आते हैं जहाँ पे शायद वो 6 to 8 में जंप करे, बट ऑन एन एवरेज तो आई कांट से कि हर रोज कोई 8 घंटे पढ़ता होगा.
मेरे केस में सर थोड़ा जर्नी डिफरेंट है, बिकॉज आई हैड वेरी लिमिटेड टाइम. तो आई यूज्ड टू, सो व्हेन आई स्टार्टेड स्टडिंग, बिकॉज आई हैड बीन अ कॉर्पोरेट जॉब विद द लॉन्गेस्ट पीरियड ऑफ टाइम, राइट? I remember the first month that I studied, I couldn't study for more than 5 hours. मेरा मतलब उससे ज्यादा मेरा कैपेसिटी ही नहीं था पढ़ने का. When second month came, that number started increasing to 6 to 7. By January, which is when I actually started my pre-preparation, that number started crossing 8. तो वो 8 to 10 के बीच में रेंज करने लग गया. मतलब it was usually like 8 hours in my Jan. Feb से वो नंबर और बढ़ने लग गया. So it's basically how much you're pushing your body. I think March से तो there is no limit to how much you should study. Like 2 months before pre, 2 months before mains, don't think about anything else. Just spend as much time as you can. तब I think you go between 10 to 12. उससे पहले you can do less than 10, but just maintain consistency. Like, and take breaks if you want to. Like, I remember March end, which is like a peak of preparation season, I took a 3-day break. I was like, I have studied too much. It's important for my mental health. I went and met my friends for 3 days. But when I came back, I started putting 13 hours because I was refreshed. So focus on your mental health and workout. Like, I think it's very underrated. But जैसे आप 6 hours, 8 hours बोल रहे हो ना, बाकी को कुछ घंटे कुछ तो करो, okay? Don't spend time watching Netflix. It uses up your brain. Instead, do things which refresh your brain. So I would go for a run every day for like an hour. It helped me to like have that dopamine rush, and I would study better. Or talk to your family, watch YouTube videos on like contents which does not feel like a lot. तो उस तरह से आप, पर उसको आप प्लीज 6 to 8 hours में काउंट मत करो, because it's not productive studying. So I think that's that.
Okay. So guys, we'll take just last 2 questions, okay? Ma'am, how had been your current affairs strategy and how did you make notes out of it? Current affairs specifically.
For optional.
For optional या in general पूछ रहे हो यूनुस? In general जिसको current affair क्योंकि एक section भी माना जाता है यूपीएससी की तैयारी में, दोनों के लिए ही पूछ रहे होंगे आई गेस.
आई थिंक दोनों के लिए बहुत ऑप्शनल और जीएस का बहुत अलग स्ट्रैटेजी होता है. If you're talking about pre, I always say static is the king. Because if you have a very strong hold on static, decent hold on current affairs, you can actually clear pre. For mains, current affairs, and वो मैंने generally PT 365 से किया था mostly. Like just stick to one resource, don't over index on it. It has a very low return when it comes to current affairs because it's too much, it's too vast. So restrict to one resource, keep revising it, and इसके लिए maybe like in some other session I would talk about a detailed strategy when it comes to a GS current affairs.
Yes.
But talking more about optional current affairs, देखो आपका पेपर 1 में तो कुछ करंट अफेयर्स होता ही नहीं है. इट्स अ कंप्लीटली स्टैटिक पेपर टू बी ऑनेस्ट.
Very nice.
पेपर 2 इज अ करंट अफेयर्स ओरिएंटेड पेपर, बट उसका करंट अफेयर्स के लिए आपको पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. आप अपना GS1 का सोसाइटी, एंड दिस आई थिंक इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट पीपल मिस. People think that people who have sociology optional should not study GS1 society. I don't know why people think that way. Because GS1 का सोसाइटी जो आप पढ़ते हो ना, वो बहुत अब GS2 जैसे पढ़ते हो, कम्युनिटीज, डेटा, नंबर्स एटसेट्रा. टू बी ऑनेस्ट, वो वाला जितना आप उसके लिए प्रिपेयर कर रहे हो उतना करंट अफेयर्स इनफ है फॉर ऑप्शनल का करंट अफेयर्स. एंड बाकी लाइक आई डोंट थिंक आई एवर स्पेंड अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम डूइंग करंट अफेयर्स हियर. आई थिंक आपके भी कुछ ज्यादा क्लासेस नहीं थे करंट अफेयर्स के, एंड आई जस्ट यूज्ड टू डू लाइक जो मैं अपना GS1 का सोसाइटी के लिए करती थी, व्हिच यूज्ड टू टेक मी अ डे मैक्सिमम टू रिवाइज. तो don't, like when it comes to sociology as an optional, there's nothing called like a current affair.
Definitely. In fact, हम भी ना current affair पे कभी ज़्यादा focus नहीं करते हैं, even in our foundation classes or even in crash course. और हर साल हमारा ये एक ritual होता है, current affair जो भी है उसको हम YouTube पे upload कर देते हैं. और वो एक ही वीडियो के अंदर हम कवर कर देते हैं उस साल के लिए जो हमें इम्पोर्टेंट लगता है. सो समहाउ करंट अफेयर का जो रेलेवेंस है वो ओवरस्टेटेड है, और कहीं ना कहीं वो स्टूडेंट के अंदर ना अननेसेसरी फोमो क्रिएट करता है, which they feel is very important somehow. But as she said, in prelims static is the king 90%. और इनके पहले जो भी आए हैं टॉपर्स पिछले 5-6 दिनों में जो आए हैं, सबने यही बोला है स्टैटिक प्रीलिम्स में इज द किंग 90%. और जो 10% है दैट इज करंट अफेयर. इवन इफ यू मिस आउट ऑन इट, यू कैन अफोर्ड टू मिस आउट ऑन द स्टैटिक पार्ट विच हैज बीन रेपिटेटिव. मेंस के अंदर GS2 और 3 में आई गेस करंट का रोल होगा.
तुम्हें बहुत ज्यादा है टू बी ऑनेस्ट, बिकॉज पॉलिटी नाउ हैज बिकम much more dynamic. For example, you would have seen the Public Examination Act. It was like a complete googly for that matter. Or like IR is completely dynamic. उसका again I would say a very different strategy for GS. So I'll not get into it. पर आपका GS1 static होता है, GS2 dynamic होता है, GS3 dynamic होता है, GS4 तो GS4 it's ethics. Essays anyway, essay. optionals mein there are optionals which have a very, like for example PSIR, I know for a fact is highly much more current affairs oriented. Sociology is an optional is not that like current affairs oriented. Like you need to know what's happening in the world, right? Because I last year, I don't know if you people saw the paper. Paper 2 had like 5 questions related to women. I think the reason was the entire Calcutta rape that was going on. It was about women's safety. Like there were 2 questions on women's safety. Or for example, there were 3 questions around migration or demographic winter even in paper 1, right? So these are the things that if you're reading newspapers or if you're reading editorials, you would anyway know. So बस उतना ही करंट अफेयर्स चाहिए सोशो के लिए, उससे ज़्यादा नहीं चाहिए. और लाइक कास्ट सेंसस एंड ऑल बिकॉज़ इट्स अ लॉट इन द न्यूज़, तो वो मतलब बेसिक्स आपको सब कुछ पता होने चाहिए. आई थिंक एनी कोचिंग मटेरियल लाइक निशत सर का वो लाइक 5 पेजेस समथिंग इज मोर देन इनफ.
हमने भी वही कास्ट सेंसस पे और बाकी इश्यूज पे पीडीएफ अपलोड किया था. बट अगेन हम ये बहुत ज़्यादा स्ट्रेस करते हैं कि आप करंट अफेयर को ना सोशोलॉजी में कई क्या करते हैं बच्चे ना. आई हैव सीन पीपल एनालाइज the Hindu and Indian Express editorial every day through sociological perspective. Okay, every day they try to find something sociological in the newspaper coming up and discussing that out with their friends through Marxist or feminist perspective and so on and so forth. Somehow that ROI is very less. Why? Because when the day comes that you have to write an answer to that question, that discussion may not strike you.
Yeah.
However, if the basic structure did not strike you or the content did not strike you, then you have a chance to lose out on lot than what you would have lost if you had remembered the current. So static is anyway very very.
I don't think I ever did a sociological perspective analysis of Hindu. Like the only reason I used to read a society article in Hindu is ताकि मैं GS1 GS2 में quote कर सकूं.
Yes.
तो उसके लिए important है, but not for this.
Very nice. Okay. Ma'am scored 210 personality test, yeah, and I think you can easily find out why. The confidence speaks for itself, and that's what matters eventually at the end of the day. It's not just how much you know, it's also about how do you present the same. Okay, so वो presentation ही है personality test, so I guess. So I think guys, अब हम session close कर देते हैं, because GS का तो I'm sure that she will be taking session for GS as well in some other place. I thought कि let us limit to sociology with us, ताकि वो आपको specifically एक जगह sociology का मिल जाए कुछ.
I anyway have a Telegram channel where I'll be sharing my entire strategy and my notes and tests, especially in detail.
Oh,
so
if you could share your Telegram channel link with the students.
I just need to check it myself also.
Telegram.
So all my tests will be available on that and like the main resources. So you can just refer it there, obviously. But like videos are much more informational because I can speak much more. But like you can just. So like the typical t.me.
Okay. तो वो जो हाइपरलिंक होता है टेलीग्राम का t.me, उसके बाद ये लिखना है.
Yeah. So this is like the overall.
बेसिकली अगर आप टेलीग्राम पे डायरेक्ट भी जाते हो और सर्च में अगर आप सिर्फ ये भी लिख दोगे
तो भी आ जाएगा.